Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, the UK's largest professional union for prison, correctional and secure psychiatric workers with over 30,000 members. As regular listeners will know, each month we look at a different aspect of the union's work. In this episode, former Northern Ireland Regional Chairman and Honorary Life Member Finlay Spratt looks back at his 30 years as a POA representative, together with Area Secretary June Robinson. Both have been awarded the MBE for their work, which includes establishing the Northern Ireland Prison Service Trust in the years following the Good Friday Agreement. I started off by asking Finlay when he first got involved in the POA and whether he had had any previous union experience. POA. When did you join the Northern Ireland Prison Service, and had you any experience or history of being involved in unions before then?
Yes, I've been involved in trade unions for the last 50 years. Actually, I was the worst convener at the Northern Ireland, or the Electricity Board here in Northern Ireland, at the Kilkira Power Station, which is just outside Londonderry. So therefore, when I joined the prison service in 1976, I was already accredited representative for the APTU, Electrical Plumbing Trade Union. That was Frank Chappell was the leader at that time. So I joined the prison service in June 1976.
And did it take you long before you got involved in the POA?
No, I joined the prison service in June 1976. I was then transferred to McGilligan after I'd done my training, and I was elected to the local branch committee in December 1976.
And what was your journey in POA terms from there on to the ultimate destination of being the Northern Ireland Regional Officer?
Well, I was elected onto the committee, and then I held various positions within the committee. And then in 1984, I was the first vice chairman to be elected to the POA in Northern Ireland. Before, all I ever had was the chairman. So in 1984, I was elected the vice chairman of the POA. And then in 1986, I was elected then the chairman of the POA in Northern Ireland, which I served up until 2016.
And I'm interested in the changes that took place in the POA during that period. The fact that there wasn't a vice chair post and then one was created, and that was the post you filled, did that indicate that the union was expanding in those times or needed more resource in terms of its officers?
Yes, and them days, the POA was expanding in Northern Ireland. We were recruiting quite a lot of new members because the prison service had very small numbers. And then because of the troubles, the prisons expanded. I mean, when I was the vice chairman, the POA had 9 branches at that time and 2,500 members. So the POA was expanding, and the area committee at that time put a motion to conference that they need a vice chairman because the chairman wasn't always available. And I was the first vice chairman. But I mean, then that expanded up, because I eventually went on to become the chairman of the association.
And while you were occupying these roles, at least initially, were you still on the job as well as doing the role for the union?
Yes, I was on the job up until 1988, where I was released by the Northern Ireland Prison Service to become the full-time member of staff. And then John Hall was the area secretary at the time. He was then transferred out to London to assist him there. So I become the area chairman, the area secretary, the area treasurer, all combined, because John Hall was assisted by June at that time. She was just the POA to John Hall. It was a huge workload, but I was very well serviced by the POA at that time, which actually was June. And I mean, that's why June and I have, we've worked together this over 30 years.
So was it hard to persuade the NIPS to grant you full-time release, or were you pushing at something of an open door?
No, it was the area secretary at that time, John Hall, approached the NIO he gave me full-time facility because he had to go to England. He eventually became the Deputy General Secretary. So he wanted to go to England. So the only way they could do it, they got agreement from the Northern Ireland Prison Service to release me full-time. In fact, I've still got the letter here in my briefcase, 1988.
Did you ever need to show that letter to people who said, "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be elsewhere?"
No.
That's good.
No.
Cool. Okay, June, can I turn to you now, because you of course have a unique role in the union, not just in Northern Ireland but in the union as a whole. You've never been a prison officer, which I think makes you unique amongst the union staff, certainly in Northern Ireland. Can you tell us what is unique about the position of area secretary and how it differs from say an assistant general secretary?
Okay, you probably correct. It is unique, and just probably to draw a direct comparison with an assistant general secretary, the position of an area secretary would be a more administrative role. And yes, I am responsible ultimately to the general secretary and the area chairman. And in my opinion, it's worked quite well because I know my responsibilities and I take my job pretty seriously. I try to do it to professional standard, and yes, there are differences obviously between my role and I have a position on the area committee and that of an assistant general secretary. And yes, I was the first area secretary to be appointed in a frontline position who was not a prison officer.
Was there ever a time when actually the general secretary and perhaps Finlay were saying different things, and you had to persuade them to come back together?
Believe it or not, no. And I think that's probably a credit to the General Secretary, whoever that, there's been various General Secretary, and to Finlay Spratt, who was the area chairman. At the end of the day, everybody works for the POA membership, whether you're based in Cronin House in London, Castell House in Northern Ireland, everybody's got the same aim, and it has never been an issue.
I mean, that's very good to hear. But of course, the membership that you're serving is extraordinarily exposed in many ways. They have unique challenges that possibly no other section of the workforce face. Finlay, given those challenges and given the particular nature of those challenges, what's kept you going? What kept you going through your 30 years as the area chairman?
What kept me going was, I was elected by the membership, and from the outset, I was determined that I was going to speak out on behalf of the membership. Unfortunately, before, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet, before I come along, there was nobody speaking up for prison officers. And I was determined from day one that I was going to be the face of members, because nobody was defending them. Not even the Northern Ireland Prison Service came out and represented them, their views. So I said from day one that I was elected, I would represent them, but that was going to cost me life. That's just the way it is,
So what were the particular challenges, or what were your reflections on that period of time? Things that came along that you weren't expecting, either for good or ill.
Well, we knew the job that we do is difficult. We knew the risks involved, and there was a lot of risks. I practically live in a house here that's bullet and bomb-proof, because that's just the way I had to live. But I knew what the challenges were, and I wasn't going to shrink away from those challenges. And as I said, the membership put faith in me, so therefore I think I owed them that they stand up for their...
So that interaction between the members and the officers who have the privilege of serving them is obviously a very, very important bond. But in discharging that role, you inevitably have a public profile. And yes. I wondered what your strategy was for facing the media, what skills and tips you can pass on to those who come after you, but also how you coped with the public recognition.
Well, basically, June and I was a lot in the public eye from our press conferences and all. But you just got to the stage you just ignore it. You don't pay any heed. We have a job to do, and that's the only way we could do it. We had to be out there in the media that comes with the job that you do. If you're representing people, so you have to take in your stride, and you just have to get used to it.
And in keeping with that, I understand that you've been offered opportunities to tell your story, as it were, either to the newspapers or in book form, but you've never felt minded to pick that up.
No, because yes, I've had many requests from the media and different journalists and stuff. Would I tell my story, and that'd be an interesting story, but it was never attempted to divulge anything what went on in the prison service. And basically, I declined because I'm a trade unionist, and I'm not going to try and make money on the back of the people that are represented, and particularly quite a lot of staff that were murdered. That just would be wrong in my eyes to do that.
I hear what you're saying. I'm sure that strikes a chord with virtually everyone who's listening. But you have been in office during some momentous times, some very challenging times. But I wonder, when there were seismic events in Northern Ireland, such as the 1981 hunger strikes, what was the atmosphere like amongst the membership when that was happening?
Well, the membership was very scary for them, because their loved ones left in the morning. They didn't know, for the families, they didn't know whether they were going to come back all right at night. It was a very scary time all around. But fortunately, believe it or not, during the hunger strike, there was no officers was murdered during that 7 months of the hunger strike. But it still was a scary time for the staff and for the families that had to live through it. Yes, we have had difficulty, we have had hairy times, but I mean, I have to say, quite honestly, that I personally, as the area chairman, was very well serviced by our present area secretary. I just can't find words to describe what she done on behalf of the members in Northern Ireland.
Well, we'll turn to that in a moment. But while we're on the theme of the impact of seismic events on the membership, of course, the 1983 Mays prison breakout must have been a very difficult period of time for the POA membership.
It was a very difficult time. The POA office was just open. The full-time office was just opening up in Malay at the time, Mays escape. And also there was an officer stabbed during that escape. And it was a very difficult time. It was difficult for all prison service families, not just those serving in jail, but the families that were outside. That was a very difficult period. There was quite a lot of murders following that Mays escape. It's hard for me to describe it now in them terms sometime later, but that certainly, all I can assure you, it was a difficult time.
Just to pick up on something you mentioned to Finlay about how did he deal with the media attention, he's actually being very humble. Finlay, as he's already alluded to, received numerous threats, and his family had to live with those threats, but he took it on his stride, never once shied away from interviews. And in fact, and just to tell you a quick story, we were actually visiting, there was a friend and a colleague. She was in hospital in Belfast, the Royal Victoria Hospital in West Belfast. She was actually injured in a bomb attack in Armagh prison. And we were going to visit her during visiting hours, and we parked in the visitor's car park, and we were walking into the hospital. And I can tell you, the looks that Finlay got going into the hospital from not just patients, but visitors, because his face was so well known. And in that area of Belfast, let's just say he wouldn't have been the most popular prison. Anyway, we visited our colleague, we came back, got into the car, and I said to him, oh my goodness, I can't believe the looks that you got. Are you going to check under the car? And he went, what do you mean? And I said, Finlay, did you know? He was totally oblivious. And that just sums him up. He just took it in his stride and just got on with it. And he's probably embarrassed me telling that story, but that would be him.
June, Finlay has described the nature of your contribution, but in practical terms, what sort of things do you have to do to support POA members and their families?
Well, when I started working for the POA in 1985, the office was within the grounds of the Prison Service Training College in Malay. there were a lot of houses within those grounds, and they were kept for families of prison staff who were basically intimidated out of their houses by terrorists, possibly overnight. Maybe got a phone call or a knock at the door from the police telling them their lives were under threat and they had to move out overnight. So the houses at the training college beside the POA office were their refuge. So generally it was a husband and wife and their children. I had to try and relocate the children to local primary schools, possibly 100 miles away from the schools that the children were used to going to, getting them uniforms, finding out about public transport, all sorts of queries. And even, to be honest with you, it was mainly just being an ear for, in most cases, it was the wives. The wives, so upset, crying, literally had to leave their houses overnight, leave all their clothes behind, maybe no money. And the POA was always very, very helpful. We would assisted them with money. And over the years, and as I say, since 1985, when I started working for the POA, although this terrorist threat affected Northern Ireland members, the NEC were always 100% behind us. Anything they could do to help our staff, they were right behind us.
But shouldn't the employer take the lead responsibility in looking after their staff, or was the employer not able to for whatever reason?
Well, to be fair to the employer, just to give you an example, when the families were being moved overnight, the employer would have provided a removal firm, and again, all their staff had to be security cleared. Staff who had to sell their house and get a new house, there was a government scheme, the SPED scheme, Special Purchase of Evacuated Dwellings. The prison service did their bit. I'm not knocking the prison service, but the families were housed beside the POA office, and it was the POA that they turned to.
I suppose the establishment of the office at Castell House must have been very significant in terms of giving the POA more resources and more identity. But I bet Castell House could tell some stories.
Yes, it probably could. It would make your hair curl as curly as mine, Simon. Yes, we could tell some stories. Probably the most bizarre incident in my head, I think, was in those days we would have had night patrol officers who patrolled the grounds of the Prison Service College and Castell House, and they alerted us to the fact that on one of their night patrols they had noticed a suspicious device at the gates to Castell House, the electronic gates as you go into the office. So this happened at the weekend. They contacted the police, and obviously in the army it was diffused. We're going into work on Monday morning. We weren't even told about it. It was only the night patrol contacted us at the weekend. So we're still waiting on the police formally telling us, did you know there was a bomb at your office? And you just couldn't make it up.
Well, there's lots about this that I think you couldn't make up, and kind of not in a good way. So is it right to kind of think of Castell House as a kind of refuge as well as an office?
Absolutely. Well, yes, I believe it was a refuge. And back in the day, I know times have changed. Back in the day, a lot of prison officers in those days were male, going into work, working in the maze, long hours. Their wives brought up the children, maybe didn't work. So when they were rehoused in Malile due to intimidation, I dealt a lot with the women and the children. They just had nobody else to turn to. And it was their refuge, and it was 24/7. It definitely wasn't a 9-to-5 job, because it's just the sort of job you can't switch off.
For sure. And how did you keep yourself going?
That's just the way I am. I do keep going. Yeah, I don't know. That's just me. That's my job. That's what I'm paid to do.
Finlay, was the POA ever, or is the POA kind of seen as the same way as the prison service itself? And if it is, what can be done to establish a kind of separate identity?
All I can tell you is, from my experience, the terrorists acting prison officers, they seem to think that the prison officers were different to the management of the Northern Ireland Prison Service, because the management, as far as I'm aware, ever suffered any intimidation or attacks from them. It was all directed towards prison officers. So obviously, from a terrorist point of view, they felt that by attacking prison officers and their families, they could change the conditions that their inmates are living in the jails. So there's certainly, the terrorists showed a difference.
And can anything be done really to try and stem that tendency, I suppose, to intimidation or the vulnerability your members have?
Well, every chance that we got, we flagged it up in the media that prison officers are only there to do a job. We can't do nothing about the prison regime. We can't do anything. We're there to do a job and deliver a service. And that's every chance that we got. That's all we could do. We couldn't do anything about the intimidation because that was a matter for the security forces. But we as a trade union couldn't do anything about the intimidation. All we could do was to be there when somebody was intimidated to help them get them through the problem.
Before we move on, I don't know. It's like harboring on about the past because I don't want people to think, war stories, but, just the fact, I remember one of the, I don't know whether you would call it a loyalist strikes or protest. I had to go into the office and sleep in the office the night before because the roads were blocked. The next morning, everybody knew they were going to be blocked. And I had to go in. I'm not playing up, oh, poor me, poor female, but people nowadays just wouldn't believe. Well, you went in and slept in the office. And I mean, not that there was a bed, but, people, in the way it's changed times, but I don't like to bleed on about it, but it's, when you look back, sometimes you think, this is surreal. Did that really happen?
Finlay, would you agree?
Right. No, certainly things are different now. And June there talked about the bad old days, and June quite rightly says we don't want to keep on harping back to the past. But things are certainly a lot different. I mean, prison officers can go about their business now without any difficulty, but they're still being subject to intimidation, and there's not much we can do about that. As the POA, as a trade union, are there for them whenever they're needed. But certainly the situation in Northern Ireland, the climate and the atmosphere is entirely different today than what it was in the days that the troubled time, it's certainly different.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to get across is, although, we refer to the bad old days, if it wasn't for the POA at that time, both locally and the support nationally, the staff had no one else to turn to. Being part of a union, it's not just about pay. There's so much more goes on. And if you're part of a family, there's always somebody to turn to. As I say, union membership isn't just about pay.
Indeed, I understand the family dynamic that you talk about, June. So is the Prison Service Trust that yourselves have set up, is that an extension of that kind of value set, that the POA is a family as much as a union?
Well, in my eyes, yes, it certainly is. And that's a terminology we use quite a lot. In the Prison Service Trust, we talk about the prison service family. So it's not just about, and you don't have to be a POA member to be involved with the trust. It's open to anybody that works in the prison service. And we also like to consider the wives and the children's, widowers, part of the Prison Service Trust family. And it took a lot of years of battling to get the Prison Service Trust set up. For many years, we were regarded basically as second-class citizens compared to the Police Service of Northern Ireland in terms of not just media attention, but in terms of government funding. So we eventually got the go-ahead after years of battle in 2002 to set up the Prison Service Trust. And we receive government funding on an annual basis, and we're very grateful for that. We obviously would like more, but that's something that we have to battle with every year when the funding application comes round. But we do our best with the amount of money we get to look after widows and widowers, not just of murdered colleagues, but also those who die in service and medically retired staff. We have even set up separate funds because we didn't get the government funding to look after serving prison staff and age retired staff. So we have now developed separate funds, and we are very, very active. We have an office based at Hyde Bank Woods. the Young Offenders Centre in Belfast, and we're very grateful for the funding we get, and we like to think for the little amount of money we get, we can make a difference to so many lives.
Yeah, of course, it's easy to forget, I guess, that even if the tension and the challenges of the Troubles is history, it's still a really difficult, dangerous job that your members do. And therefore, all that support is needed. Finlay, have you noticed changes in the nature of the job over the period of time since you've started? Is it still, for example, a job for life if people want that?
No, it's a job for life if they want it, but it appears from the young ones that are coming in today don't treat it as a job for life. They just treat it as a stopgap. They'd move on to a different career. But certainly, it's a job for life if you want it. I mean, I practically served my whole life there. But the trend seems to be the young ones are coming in. They're want to move on. So there are very few career.
The reason for that is that the salary for the new recruits is so much less than the salary of what we call the old hands back in the day. So the recruits are starting on way less money. And if they can get an alternative job, whether that's within the police or the private sector, they go through the training and get a foot in the door of the prison service. And if they get a better offer, they're gone. And I think that's something that the POA is constantly fighting for year upon year with pay awards. We need the salary of the young recruits pushed up.
Yeah, and the employer or the government are not going to do it on their own, are they? And that's so the union has a key role in that.
I think it would be wrong. It would be remiss of us to not refer to. We have had not just the most recent murder of a prison officer back in 2016, but we have also had 2 POA Northern Ireland officials murdered in 1977 and 1988. And in respect to their families, I'm not mentioning their names, but people take on the role of a trade union rep, and it comes with so many other dangers, and this is just the reality of Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, it's a very sad reality, and hopefully there will be no more murders, but nobody has the answer to that.
In terms of a closing message, as it were, to listeners who will be well aware of the length and the quality of service and sacrifice that the two of you have given, are there particular things that you'd like to leave in their minds as we come to the end of this podcast?
Could I just go back a wee bit?
Of course you could.
Because I noticed June talking there, but she's been making very lightly of what the role that she played in supporting prison officers. I mean, people may not be aware, June was awarded the MBE for that role, and she rightly deserved it. I think she paid very light of the role she played, and I have to give her credit where credit's due. Without her, I would have stumbled, because we looked just as a team. And I mean, I'll give you an example. I would have sat here at the weekend, maybe drafting up a thing, and then I'd take it on to June. I didn't have to write anything. I could just put a scribble. She knew exactly what I was saying. That's how close as a team we were working. We knew one another's mind and think, and I must admit, a real pleasure to be working in that environment. I can't say any more about it. It just was brilliant.
Sorry, just going back to this whole business about being in a union, it's really not just about pay. If you're in a large organisation, call it a family, you can achieve so much more. When it comes to negotiations with management, if you've got the backing of hundreds of staff, the world's your oyster. And the POA is the only union in Northern Ireland which has recognition rights by management for uniformed staff in terms of pay. And I just can't stress enough how, it's a slogan which is often trotted out, but it's there for a reason. Unity is strength.
There's no doubt about it. The POA in Northern Ireland has done a tremendous job for the past serving and the present one and you need to be in a union. My experience is if you not belong to a union, then management can do what they like with you. And I think it's important that anybody joining the Northern Ireland Prison Service today, they join the POA as a trade union, because the trade union, the POA, has done an excellent job all my time there, and I have to pay credit to NEC in London. Anything that I needed or assistance, they were there, and they were there for the members of Northern Ireland, and people should not forget that.
Finlay, June, thank you very much indeed. So the message is clear. The union can and does make a real difference to the working lives of prison officers wherever they work. So if you haven't signed up yet, speak to your local POA rep or head over to poauk.org.uk to find out how to join and all the information about the union and the work that it does. Thank you for listening to the POA podcast. We hope you like what you've heard and will join us for the next edition. Until then, thank you and goodbye. The POA podcast is presented by me, Simon Sapper. Music is by Scott Holmes.